Welcome to the Be What You Want podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to Whitney Johnson. Now, Whitney is a disruption theorist. She's also a keynote speaker, a consultant within her own firm, and she's famous for many things now. On LinkedIn, for example, she has more than 1.5 million followers. She has a Fundamentals of Entrepreneurship course, which is another LinkedIn course as well that's been viewed by more than 1 million people. And she's even got a TEDx that I watched this morning, which was really cool. So Whitney does a whole host of things. She focuses on disruption and innovation. She's got 3 books to her name. I believe the first one was Dare, Dream, Do. We've also got then Disrupt Yourself, which talks about leadership and how you can initiate change in your own life. And then a follow-up to that was Building the A-Team, which she implements to her corporate B2B sort of clients. So I could go on all day with Whitney's very impressive bio, but I would like to just skip straight to it and welcome her to the podcast. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. Okay. Well, listen, we have a kind of business, personal development focused audience. So I am going to go out on a limb here and say that they probably may either already follow your work or be sort of comfortable with some of the concepts that we're going to discuss. So what I propose for this chat is that we just have a real kind of bang, 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 bing, bing, bing kind of conversation where we just go for it and, just connect deep and meaningful.
Okay.
I know that that's where your intellect's at, and I know that that is what everyone really enjoys. So let me open with something broad. What inspires you about your work?
Oh, Chris, I love that question. So I think, well, what inspires me? Yeah, I'm getting tongue-tied. So what I love about the work that I get to do is that every single day I get the opportunity to find ways to instruct people, to inspire people to change, to do this thing that they want to do. We all want to change. We all want to improve, but we oftentimes are scared to do that. And so I love that, having worked on Wall Street, having worked with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, having really understood disruptive innovation, and then being able to take that framework and reimagine it and apply it to the individual. It's not just about products and services, and apply it to people, and then make it safe so that you and I are saying, okay, I know it's time for me to do something new. I know I've got to change jobs or change cities or just change roles. Now I've got this structure, the 7-point framework of personal disruption. And that inspires me because every day I know that if I do my work well, someone will have the courage, have the tenacity to do something just a little bit differently, and as a consequence be happier. And so that is really what motivates me every single day.
Absolutely. Now it's interesting because inspiration, from my point of view, is something that you unleash in another individual, right? So basically, what frameworks do, I think frameworks and facilitation, because some people need to read content, watch content, etc., and some people need people like you and I to go in and facilitate that conversation, because both the combination of framework and facilitation, that's the very thing that gives indeed the permission that you just talked about. And that's so crucial for people to, as you said, feel safe to go, this is possible in my life, and also I can now see, with reference to a framework, how I've been holding myself back. So it's the aha light bulb moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And I love that you said that, Chris, because I think I love having developed these frameworks, the framework of personal disruption, the learning curve framework. But now that you say that idea of how you're describing that facilitation, it's funny. One of my colleagues was saying to me the other day, she's like, you love coaching, don't you? And I thought about it. I was like, do I love coaching? And then I had just had like 6 or 7 coaching calls in one day, and you'd think, oh, she's exhausted. And at the end of the day, I had so much energy, and I realized, oh, to put it in your words, I love the facilitation piece as well. So having those frameworks, having those guideposts, but then the opportunity, the privilege that you and I both have to be able to help facilitate that learning that can take place and that change that can take place. That the two in combination are really, really what makes it exciting and fun.
They are, and it's about, should we say, you have the light bulb moment and you almost set people free to go and do what they realize they were always meant to do. And a framework, as you said, I think I like the phrase goalposts as well. It shows you how you can aim that energy. But what I love about inspiration, for example, is that show people how you can aim the energy, but also basically once I've done that, once I've achieved that and ignited them, what's very liberating and I think also energizing about coaching and facilitation is that I know hand on heart, it's now up to them, because they've got this their life, it's their energy, it's their passion, and I've shown them how, so that's brilliant too. So that's one of the ways I think about it too. So I think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Okay, well, let's start, getting into a little bit of where you've come from, your background, and how you got to this disruption place. So I know that you started out as an equity analyst at Rose Park Advisors. Was this part of how you began your interest in disruption? Because I did listen to your TEDx this morning. I know there's a bit of a personal story there, but can you tap into that a little bit and tell us a little
Yeah.
how disruption began for you?
Yes. It's really, it started when I graduated from college. So I had studied music in college, and my husband and I, we graduated. We were going to New York because he was getting his PhD in biochemistry at Columbia. And so we get to New York and we're like, okay, so he's going to school. Someone has to make money. I guess it's going to be me. I have a music degree. So how are we going to do this? Because, musicians don't make any money. And so I started working on Wall Street as a secretary to a retail broker on 1345 Avenue of the Americas, for those of you who know New York. And one of the big ahas I started to have is I'm like, okay, well, here I am. I'm going to work every day. I am making very little money. If I'm going to keep doing this, why would I make X when 10X is a possibility? And the people that I'm looking at over here who aren't secretaries don't seem any smarter than me. So I'm going to I'm going to start taking business courses at night, and I'm going to figure out how to move from being a secretary onto the professional track, which I eventually was able to do. And if you've worked on Wall Street, that doesn't happen. And so that for me, I wouldn't have known to call it this then, but that was really the beginning of me disrupting myself, of the perception I had of myself. And so I worked as an investment banker, and then I stepped back to become an equity research analyst. We had 2 children, which is obviously a very big disruption. And then I left Wall Street, co-founded this investment firm with Clayton Christensen, and now several more disruptions later, I'm an author and a researcher, and have codified this framework of personal disruption that I was alluding to earlier that I get to teach to organizations around the world. So when I first was introduced to this framework of disruptive innovation, I was an equity analyst. I had just read The Innovator's Dilemma, and I had this little bit of an insight that, yes, this applied to what I was doing in terms of analyzing stocks, but it also applied to people. And that was just this kernel of an idea. And that was what got me at first to actually leave Wall Street. But then when I started working with Clay Christensen, starting this investment fund using disruptive innovation, that's when this idea just started taking hold of me. I'm like, I have to chase this down. What does this look like? What does this mean for people, et cetera? And so interested in the idea, it helped me understand what was going in the stock market, but it also helped me understand what was happening in my personal life in terms of going to Wall Street, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the beginning of me being interested in disruptive innovation.
That's really interesting. And I'd like to pick up on a little thread here, then I want to see what you think about it. There are many aspects and, of course, a framework to how we can look at disruption. One of the elements that I want to ask you about is when we put ourselves personally in a zone that is not comfortable or it stirs up things for us. So for in that example there, you said, well, I was there sitting across the room from the traders and they were making 10 times the amount. I'm like, come on, guys, I can make that money. I'm as intelligent as you, etc. It's almost like putting yourself in the fire, in the furnace, in the burn area where you go, I can do that. So it almost, and this is just a theory, but see what you think. If you're in a comfortable environment where you think, oh, this is okay, I can just turn up, I can just do that. But if you almost purposefully put yourself in an environment that kind of makes you go through your own personal threshold, in the words of Tony Robbins, he says, go through threshold, get mad, get like stimulated both from a desire, but also he'd put it in the frame of pain point of view, feel that tension between the two. Is it putting yourself in that zone of discomfort where you want something and you kind of also realize you need to go a distance to get there? Is that from a personal level?
Oh yeah, I think, you know, that's a great way of describing it, because I think about, you know, it would have been so easy. Actually, when I graduated from college, if you can believe this, I wanted to be a flight attendant. Like, I wanted to be a flight attendant. I was so excited. I went and interviewed. They didn't hire me. And I would have been so happy to do that. I mean, thank goodness they didn't hire me. But to your point of creating that tension of, here we were in New York. I didn't want to go to New York. I would never have gone there on my own, but you know, I was married and I wanted to be with my husband. So I had to go to New York, but then that put me in this place where I was seeing for the first time in my life, here is what is possible. Look at what people are doing. And this was a really exciting time. This is like Liar's Poker era and Working Girl and Bonfire of the Vanities. So it was like super, super exciting. And here I was thinking, I want more, and seeing the possibility that there could be more for me. And that I think, to your, I don't know that I would, I guess it was a pain point. It was something, I want this, and how am I going to get this? For me, it was like, how am I going to get this brass ring? And that is what was really motivating for me.
Totally. And we've all got our ways of describing it, right? I mean, what I love in personal development is I guess I'm a synthesizer. So I love kind of throwing in different slightly methods and viewpoints and saying, oh, there's a link here, because I like making these links. For me, for example, I'm on my 5th business, which is Be What You Want. And over the years, in any times where there's been a tough time, anytime my wife has threatened that I need to go and get a job, it's like the ultimate pain point motivator, where I go, hell no, I'm going to make this work. So like, again, I think there's something there, isn't it? There's a whole bigger thing that I'm sure we'll tap into.
Yeah.
I think what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about business, right? And I want to talk about disruption in business. But before we do, I'd like to make an encouraging point that whilst what we're going to talk about now might be kind of entrepreneurial and business focused, I think, and please, jump in here, it's very important for professionals to remember too that we can be entrepreneurial in our careers and our next steps and our personal growth as well. Even it doesn't mean you have to set up a business in terms of like disrupting oneself. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me back up for just a second, because we hear the term disruptive innovation a lot. And I think we sometimes, so for purposes of the conversation that you and I are having, I would say disruptive innovation is a silly little thing that takes over the world. Telephone took over the telegraph, the automobile, the horse and buggy. And then we had Toyota disrupt General Motors, and then Netflix disrupted Blockbuster, now cable TV. And so that's what it looks like with a product and a service and a company. Well, personal disruption is how you take all those ideas and make them work for you. You start at the bottom of a ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump to the bottom of a new ladder. And Lady Gaga, for example, if you're like, well, what does that look like? What does personal disruption look like? Well, Lady Gaga is a great example. You know, she got to the top of the ladder, and then she jumps to the bottom of a new ladder. She collaborates with Tony Bennett on a jazz album, and then she does a Sound of Music tribute, and then she produces a country album, and then A Star Is Born. Like, this is personal disruption writ large. And so for us as individuals, what does that look like? Well, everybody who's listening to this podcast, to our conversation, if you think about it, you already know how to disrupt yourself. You've done it a lot. You did it when you were in high school. You started at the bottom, you climbed to the top, and then you jumped. And if you went to college, started at the bottom, climbed to the top, and then you jumped. And you do it every time you start a new job. You do it every time you start a new role. And so we're all actually pretty adept at it. And so what this structure, this framework of personal disruption is meant to help you do is to say, okay, I've been doing this intuitive game of chutes and ladders, but now I want to have some structure. I want to like be able to do it systematically and effectively. And so that applies. Yeah, you can apply it to a business, but it absolutely applies to you as an individual. And by putting that structure in place, by the way, the reason that the theory of disruption is so robust is that the research says that the odds of success are 6 times higher, the revenue opportunity 20 times greater. So yeah, applies to your business, but it's going to apply to you too in your career, in your life.
Yes. Yeah. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Okay. Well, let's segue onto business. I've had a few business leaders on this podcast now, and a lot of them are, very senior people like yourself. And I asked them this question: do businesses have to disrupt? And I'll say newer businesses. Do businesses have to disrupt in order to, quote, make it big?
It's a great question. And what I would say is the answer is no. So there are lots of different types of innovation, and disruptive innovation is one type of innovation. What I would say is that you're always going to be more successful when you can focus on creating rather than competing in disruption.
Yes.
That's why the odds of success are 6 times higher. But Bob Proctor has said that amateurs compete and professionals create. And I do think that while you don't have to disrupt, if you want to be successful, you have to figure out ways to create rather than compete, meaning you create and then let other people compete with you. So that would be what I would say for you as an individual, but certainly also as a business owner.
Nice. That's really nicely put, because I think that again creates a sense of space for people to well, possibility for people to be in, be creative. Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. I want to talk about your Dare Dream Do. I believe that was your first book. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you were in finance when you wrote Dare Dream Do. Can you tell us about that? Because I mean, going from finance
Why?
and then transitioning, what was the transition point? What was there a moment for you? Was there a particular inspiration? What was the transition from finance?
Yeah. Yeah. So that book came about. So it was 2005. So in 2005, I decided that I disrupted myself and I walked away from Wall Street. I didn't have a real plan. I was going to be an entrepreneur. I was going to do a show about soccer in Latin America, kind of the American Idol version of soccer in Latin America. And lots of different things I was going to do. And so now that I had disrupted myself, I had more time. Our kids at this point were 9 and 5 respectively. And I had a little bit more time. I wasn't working 80, 90 hours a week. And so I started talking to a lot of my friends and the mothers of my children's friends and asking them questions like, so what's your dream? Because here I had gone to Wall Street. I was this secretary. I was a music major and I'd achieved this dream and I was so excited. And I'm talking to all these women who are like really accomplished. They're educated. They've got 4 and 5 and 6 children. I'm like, how on earth do you do that and do it effectively? And when I would ask them what their dreams were, they'd say things like, well, I don't have a dream, or I'm not sure how to do my dream. But there was even more concerning was this unspoken, I'm not sure it's my privilege to dream. And that just was so upsetting.
Kills you, right? Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
It actually just broke my heart. I mean, it made me cry because these women were amazing. And so Dare Dream Do came from me wanting to say to them, it is your privilege. It is your birthright to dream. And here is why, and here is how you do it. And really wanting to inspire them to do it. In retrospect, there was that piece of it, but there was also another piece of it that was happening, which was I, for the first time in my life, was trying to figure out how to be a better mother and parent, and didn't quite know how to do it. And so, I had all these friends that were great harbors. I'd been a good ship. I was trying to teach them how to be a harbor. And I was trying to teach them how to be a ship, but they were teaching me how to be a harbor, how to really parent and how to mother and how to create a home. And so part of that book on the one end is to teach them how to be a ship, but on the other hand, it was sort of an homage or a paean to say, I see you and I appreciate you and I'm grateful for all that I'm learning from you as well.
Oh, that's beautifully put. And I resonate with this because I'm a father of a 3-year-old and just under 1. So what I've experienced in the same way is with my wife going to mothers groups. We call it in Australia and the UK. It's the same story. You've had people that were the vice president of the regional thing for, global shipping company and this and that, or whatever it is, and they have to then reconnect with this idea when the kids get to a certain age, for example, and they choose to then look at that. It's reconnecting with your history, the amazing skills you've already got, building up self-esteem again. And I think that comes down to the daring element, because that speaks to courage. And again, building people up to say it's okay to dream. I couldn't agree more. I think that's wonderful. So I think there's a niche or a niche for that in particular. But it's so applicable to anyone at any stage of life. So that just comes from a stage of life and a beautiful intention. What a lovely story.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Fully resonate with that. I really do. So moving on to disrupting yourself, talking about business. So I know that you then wrote a book, Disrupt Yourself, and people can read it and go, okay, I can apply this to my life in both my
Mhm.
personal areas, my professional areas. It's very common for business owners and leaders, etc., to be self-educators and continuous learners, right? So they might be more inclined in the business world to be the type of people to initially read that. But I
Right.
believe that then for these type of business leaders, it then provokes some questions from within, like, how do I bring this to the team? And
Yeah.
I want to hear how you do that at a strategic level. But one of the things that I find interesting in that is that and this is probably a limitation of the way I'm thinking about things. We've got certain people are leaders because they're leaders. They aren't necessarily the type of people that initiate and are proactive and learn and expand, etc. So one of the things that I find fascinating as a question, and I'm not saying I know the answer, is if you've got people in the team that aren't naturally leaders, is the age-old question, like, how do you get them to lead, right? So that's one of the things that I want to sort of tap into. But you let me ask the question: how do you bring this disruption concept to the level of team once you've got, should we say, a
Mhm.
buy-in and a passion from the leader, and how do you truly get everyone on the team to go, oh yeah, I can do this too? Because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So, so I love that idea of people saying, how do I help leaders learn how to lead? And so one of the things that we found is that as you said, this framework of personal disruption, it's very obvious. It's like, okay, this is like the what color is your parachute for the entrepreneur age. That makes sense to me, but what does this look like in an organization?
Mm,
So let me just talk through this learning curve framework a little bit. And again, it
great.
builds on this framework of disruptive innovation, or excuse me, personal disruption, is that everyone's on a learning curve, including you as a manager, and you start at the bottom of that learning curve where you don't quite know what you're doing, and then after several months you move into the steep part of that curve where you know enough but not too much. This is exciting, all your neurons are firing, you get to the top of the curve and things are easy, but because you're no longer getting those dopamine hits, you're no longer enjoying the feel good effects of learning, you can get a little bit bored, and so it's time for you to jump to a new learning curve. So you learn and then you leap and then you repeat over and over again. And so what ends up happening is that once you understand that every single person in your organization is on a learning curve, there are lots of implications for this. It helps you understand, how do I manage people who are brand new in a role? How do I manage people in the sweet spot? How do I manage people at the high end of the curve? How do I manage myself? It gives you this tool for managing people, for onboarding talent, for retaining talent. Then what we found in our research is that if we understand that everybody's on a learning curve, we also start to understand that our organization is a collection of those learning curves, and that you can build a high performing team and high performing organization by optimizing where people are on those learning curves. So at any given time on your team and your organization, you want 70% of your people on the steep part of that curve, where again, they're maximally engaged. It's a sweet spot. You want 15% at the low end, where they ask questions like, why do you do it like this? So they may not know what they're doing, but they're asking really good questions that open the door to innovation. And then you want 15% of your people at the high end of their learning, where they can be masters and facilitate bringing people along. And what's really interesting is that if you're like, okay, so everything's been going well, I understand people are on the learning curve, I understand that I've got to, manage people for innovation. If I'm wondering, are we about to be disrupted? All I have to do is take the pulse of my workforce. Because if I have too many people at the high end of their learning curves, what do I know? I know that they're bored, right? No
Right.
dopamine. And bored people either leave, so that's a big talent drain. So again, we're going back to that talent retention tool, or they get complacent and they stay, which is really bad, because complacent people and bored people, they don't innovate, they get disrupted. So again, we're all on a learning curve. Build a high performing team by understanding that it's a collection of learning curves, and then optimize those curves by 70% in the sweet spot, 15% at the high and low ends respectively. And just remembering that we all want to learn, leap, and repeat. We're all learning machines, and that is how you build a high performing team and organization.
Nice. That's right. That's right. It's the high level approach and strategic view, but it shows you how to blend it and distribute it across the team, and also address retention and complacency, etc. Wow. Okay, that's really cool. And one of the things that I do is a Gallup strengths coach. So I'm certified through Gallup. And one of the things that I always say to my clients is that one of the Gallup's articles and studies was that 70% of engagement is determined by the leader. So if I was to put it in crude terms, if you've got an absolutely awful boss, it means that your boss is not leading you well and you're going to leave. They are 70% responsible for you leaving because they're not leading. And it's giving the leaders the tool set and the perspective to, in this instance, tap into the dimension of learning to say, well, you can engage people by putting them on that learning curve. And so there you go. You literally.
So 70%. Interesting.
70%. There's not,
Yeah.
I'll send you the article. It's fascinating. And it makes sense. Because like intuitively, if I think about when I had my first jobs as a teenager, if I had a rubbish boss, of course I left because of the boss. It wasn't because of the company or the customers. It's always the boss.
Right.
There's, it's actually.
We hire bosses. We hire and fire bosses, not companies.
Well, exactly. And also, like, having worked in consulting and professional services, one of the problems with those industries, whether you be financial services, IT consulting, business consulting, doesn't matter. We all get promoted to our level of incompetence. There's a proper name for that. There's a something law.
It's the Peter principle, but I don't know that I agree with that actually. But keep going.
Let's unpack that. All right. Okay. So the reason I somewhat resonate with that is the idea of, just because you're a good technical analyst, you get then promoted to a consultant, you then get promoted to manager because you've been in for 5 or 6 years and you did well in your performance rating. We need to make sure that we're making them good leaders as well. That's what I find interesting about that. But tell me about your perspective on that.
Well, yeah. So I think that I think one of the things to consider is that again, we go back to this idea of everybody's on a learning curve. So and this theory of disruption that if you pursue a disruptive course, your odds of success are 6 times higher, but that's 6% to 36%. So there's still like this 64% chance that you're on the wrong learning curve. So I think that sometimes people start to underperform because they're at the top of a curve and they're bored. So it's not that they're incompetent, it's just that they've gotten bored. And so they're no longer able to contribute because they're just dialing in. Their brain is just chunking everything and there's nothing novel that makes them perk up and go, wow, this is interesting. They're also, so that's one reason. And then the other one, and maybe this goes to the Peter principle, but sometimes people just are on the wrong curves. And so then the question becomes is, it's not that they're not capable, it's not that they're not competent, it's just that you study strengths finders. We all know that we tend to overvalue what we are not good at and undervalue what we are good at. And so we oftentimes are like, hey, look at what I'm really good at. But it's not what we do best. It's just what we do well. And so we get ourselves onto the wrong curves. And so part of the question is, how do we just make sure at individually, but also as leaders, that we match people to the right curves? So part of it is matching people to the right curves, wrong curve, maybe Peter principle, but I think there's also a big element of people get to the top of the curve and it's not that they're not capable, it's just that they've gotten bored. And so we've got to help move them around.
Oh, well said. I mean, what that says to me is that maybe there's a risk in business that because we can quote something like the Peter principle, because we can quote that, what it can mean is that we can take a fatalistic attitude and kind of put our hands up and go, nah, we're done. We need to get rid of them. They just can't do it. What you're saying, which I love, is remember that everyone's on the curve. So therefore we can, should we say, take control of people's leadership potential destiny again.
Yeah, because I mean, no one wakes up and says, oh, I think I want to do a bad job on this job. We just don't. We don't. So I think I don't like the fatalistic. I mean, there's some people who aren't going to try, but usually if they're not trying, it's because at some point they felt like it didn't behoove them to try. It wasn't worth it to try. It didn't make a difference if they tried. But everybody's on a learning curve. We just have to figure out what that curve is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, beautifully said. Okay, so having written 3 books, what advice do you have for budding authors out there?
So I talked a little bit about this in podcast episode 40. So if you want to go back, of the Disrupt Yourself podcast, if you want to listen to that. But in addition to that, so start writing. I know that sounds incredibly simplistic, but just start writing. But look for the nexus of feeling like there is something you have to say and that you want to say and that you don't believe that someone else is saying. And also understand, if you, again, coming back to this principle of disruption, is that let it be a discovery driven process. We know that 70% of all successful businesses end up in a different place than where they started. If you look at when I first started writing and blogging back in 2006, 2007, my work has changed dramatically. But in starting to write, I figured out what I had to say. And I also had a chance to figure out what resonates with people and what doesn't. And I was learning. And so there's this constant feedback loop and mechanism. And so my first advice would be just to start writing. The second piece of advice I would give is don't believe that when you write, it has to be all you. So we just had this big debate because we have a daughter who's a senior in high school and she was writing her college essays, and we were trying to like, let us help you edit them. And she's like, no, because if the college accepts me, they have to be accepting me, not my essays edited by my parents and 10 other people. And I get that. But in a work situation, when you're writing a book, you write and then you get conceptual editors and you let people edit your work. It's not high school where it has to be all yours. And I think that's another thing that I would say to budding authors is start writing, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Medium, just start writing and then open your writing up and get people to edit and give you feedback and give you input, because it doesn't have to, it can be if you want, but it does not have to be a solitary endeavor. And then the third piece of advice I would give to you is think about what job you want your writing to do. Meaning, some people self-identify as writers. So someone like Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet, she self-identifies, I am a writer. Liz Gilbert, I am a writer. I, Whitney Johnson, do not self-identify as a writer. I've never considered myself a writer. I am a person who has ideas that I want to convey, that I want to instruct, something I want to say. I write in service of that, but I don't think of myself as a writer. And so as you consider yourself, okay, what job are you trying to get done with your books? What is that job? Because that's going to affect what kind of books you write, how you write them, who you work with. And it also helps you get over perfectionism. I'm a perfectionist. If I self-identified as a writer, it would have to be much better because I don't. I'm able to just write and do the work and get it done.
That is gold. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of that. This all links, as everything does, to the trinity of how you feel, what you think, and taking action. So we can think and feel, I'd like to write a book one day, but until we put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, we're not in action. And that inaction does everything that we just talked about there as well, in terms of feedback, editorial, getting confident about what your message is, getting it a bit wrong the first time, but then refining it, because you refine only through action. So being in action. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I definitely want to write a book myself, so I'm going to take all of that on board.
Good.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your entrepreneurial experience, if you have to condense down all of your entrepreneurial experience into challenge, one sentence, what's that sentence?
Yeah. Can I use a semicolon?
Go on then. I'll let you have a semicolon.
Yeah. So I would say if you're scared and you're lonely, you're on the right path to disruption.
Oh, okay. You just gave me shivers. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're not thinking like the herd.
Right. It's interesting. I'm a big fan of Earl Nightingale. He wrote The Strangest Secret, and he was a mentor to Bob Proctor, who's one of my mentors. And he said,
Okay.
the opposite of courage is not cowardice, but conformity. And so the opposite of courage, or so then if you're courageous, then you're creating, which is what we said earlier. Professionals create, amateurs compete. And so if you're scared and you're lonely, it means you're playing where no one else is playing, which means you're creating, which might mean it's scared and lonely. But that's what disruption looks like. That's what innovation looks like. That's what you figuring out what you looks like. It's something that no one else has done before.
Yep, you literally gave me shivers then. That's perfect. That's yeah, interesting. And for the entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs out there, it's being courageous to be in that new space. in addition to that, one of the things I'm passionate about is surrounding yourself with peer group, even listening to something like this, listening to other people's journeys, because whilst they might not be going into that new disruptive space that you are, there are distinctions around strategy, perspective, attitude, energy, all of that stuff, and even just the technicalities of entrepreneurship that you can, why wouldn't you accelerate the wisdom of fellow people that have been there before?
Absolutely.
So it's the courage to play in that space and then tap into community at the same time.
Yes, 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 yes. There's a duality, isn't there?
There is.
Courage to play where no one else is playing, and the courage to ask for help.
Yeah.
And the courage to, well, not courage, that's not the right word, but to be in a position where there are people that you can ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Like, to put it simply, whenever I'm having a challenging thing in business, I don't go to talk to my friends that aren't business owners. Love you all, but I go to my fellow business owner mates because they get it at a different level.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Now, outside of all the work that you're currently doing, are there any other big goals that you are inspired to tackle through your lifetime?
Oh, outside of work, you mean?
Whatever well, actually, yeah, anything you like. Any particular big goals are the, whether it be personal or whether it be professional, are there any other things that you're like, I
Yeah.
really want to tackle this. I want to take on this big goal.
Yeah. So I want to have a really happy family, and I think we're on track to do that. So I don't know that that's what you were asking, but that is really important to me.
Mhm.
Another big goal, and this is still work because actually I love my work, and so my work is also my hobby, is to help 1,000 organizations use this learning curve framework to manage their talent and lower their disruption score. And so I suppose one of the big goals that I have right now is that I've been very focused, on writing books and doing speaking. And now I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I become this business owner? How do I become an entrepreneur? And so I've read the E-Myth, and like, what does that look like? Because it's very different to just have this idea and write a book than it is to like build a business around your intellectual property. And so that's my big, interesting, hairy, exciting, fascinating challenge that I'm working on right now.
Really cool, really cool. And to put it in rich dad, poor dad terms, yeah, indeed, be the business owner, not the operator.
Yeah.
Robert Kiyosaki, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, cool, nice. And yes, and as an author and a speaker, it's very important to think about that because, ironically, one can become the bottleneck oneself if you don't take that next
Oh
expansive,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. To have to say, okay, could I be I'm doing this thing right now, but should I be delegating it? And like
Yeah,
constantly asking those questions. It's really an interesting thing to learn how to do.
it is. Having said that, there's a very exciting age that we live in from a influential digital perspective too, because still as one person, you can write a book, you can do a course
Mhm.
online, and hey, once that's there, that's replicable. Yeah, and to kind of infinity. So that's really cool. So what's on the horizon? We're having this interview at the beginning of, in February 2019. What's on the road ahead for the next year for you?
So the thing that we're really working on right now is no big surprise, is to put into place these systems and scaling. And so right now we're starting to roll out a train the trainer inside of organizations, because one of the things that's so fun is that once people understand the learning curve, it's like really sticky. And so they'll say, okay, well, we don't want you just to train our 100 senior leaders. We want to be able to train everybody in the organization, all our emerging leaders. So we're putting together this train the trainer program that people can roll out inside of their organizations. The other thing that we're working on is we've got this learning curve locator that can help you figure out where you are and help you plot where your organization is, and rolling that out and making it much more robust so that organizations can use it and slice it and dice it to really understand their workforce, because it's really gives people a lot of insight. So there's a lot of scaling and automating and additional research that's taking place.
Yeah, really cool. And that I love the alliteration and also the intention and outcome of learning locator. That's got a real yeah,
Oh, thank you.
good ring to it. I like that. Yeah, and because people can understand it very quickly. So that's very important too. Yeah, nice. Out of interest, this is completely random, but it's something present for me. Would you ever go into things like apps and things like that? Any apps?
Um, Not opposed to it. I think that we would, to the extent that it will help do what we're trying to do, to the extent that it does the job that we need it to do.
Mm.
I could see a situation where we would, but right now there's nothing on the horizon.
And what about learning management systems, LMS? For people in learning and development, you've got these big companies in the world. Most people don't know who they are because they only speak to top tier corporates. But the idea there is that content producers can put their content on an LMS, which means that all of a sudden McDonald's are using it for all their employees
Yeah.
worldwide, that kind of stuff. Have
Yeah.
you got any aspirations to kind of tap into that level of
Oh
B2B?
yeah, of course, because I mean, our goal is, to put this into 1,000 organizations. And so being
Nice.
on learning management systems, and there is a little bit of that happening, but again, that's part of what we're working on right now, is being able to scale that and put that into businesses where it's automated in a way that it's really useful to the learning management professionals, the chief human resource officers, et cetera. Chief learning officers and CHROs. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Wait a minute. What's a CHRO? Go on, educate me.
Oh, chief human resources
Chief
officer.
Human Resource Officer. Yeah, got
Yeah.
it. Nice. There's
Yeah.
so many acronyms. It's
CLO,
wonderful.
CHRO. Yeah. As you would see, you would say your chief HR officer.
Yes.
So I would say chief human resources officer, chief HR, but you'd say chief HR, right? Is that right? Is that how you would say it?
We can make a little sing song. We're just trying to get the YOLO acronyms, the CHRO.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, dear me. Cool. Well, listen, Whitney, it's been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's for me, it sharpened my tool set in terms of perspective and what's possible and how we can take a really constructive attitude to causing change in our own lives through personal and professional disruption. Thank you so much. And I just want to ask you for a bit so people can find you in the right places. Where's the best place for people to find you online?
Okay. Thank you for asking, Chris. I would say the best place to find me is whitneyjohnson.com. And just, you can find my podcast there. You can, if you want to take the diagnostic, you can do whitneyjohnson.com/diagnostic. So that's the easiest place to find me.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, Whitney Johnson, a disruption theorist, speaker, author, wonderful lady of so many realms. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Chris.